Sarah O is a puppeteer and an improviser who got her start in puppetry working on the Jim Henson Company show Splash and Bubbles. Since then, she's worked with the Muppets, Up Uncensored, and Postmodern Jukebox, and on TV shows such as Kidding and The Barbarian and the Troll, as well as the blockbuster film Five Nights at Freddy's and the upcoming sequel, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. I chat with Sarah O about her puppetry career on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Sarah O, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I'll take my answer off the air. Well, I'm so excited. I've been very fortunate to get to work with you several times in Puppet Up and on other projects. So excited to learn about your puppetry journey here today. But I want to start, as I always do, by asking you, do you remember your first exposure to puppets, the first time you saw puppets?
Probably TV. I want to say Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers. I know that's such a typical answer. What's really weird is I also grew up watching Korean TV a little bit when I was a kid, and there was a program called Popopo, which was like their version of Sesame Street. So I also remember kind of seeing like really creepy humanoid puppets, but the whole show was in Korean. And and my mom showed me that show.
And was it all puppets, or were there puppets and humans?
I think there were puppets and humans. I feel like I just have this visceral memory of how creepy the human versions of the puppets were. I was like, oh, I don't like this, but I love the puppetry, I guess.
Yeah. Were they, sorry, I've never heard of the show, so I'm asking you, I'm trying to pick your brain asking you, were they like Muppet-style puppets, or were they like latex, like Lazy Town type puppets where it's like latex faces, or?
I think they were fabric puppets with human-esque faces. And they also had like animals and other creatures, I want to say. And I could be wrong. Someone out there is probably a deep Korean kids programming listener and is like, that's wrong. But I feel like they mostly recreated like Korean fables and fairy tales and things like that. And some of them are kind of creepy. So maybe that's why I have this weird association with them being kind of spooky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those things can definitely hit. I remember my brother, there was one segment on Sesame Street that terrified my brother. He would run screaming from the room.
What was it?
It was the painter who would paint numbers on things.
Oh.
And he painted on the bald guy's head. And so my brother would watch any of them that, the painter was in, but if it was the one where he painted the 8 on the bald guy's head while he was in the pool, he would run screaming from the room.
That's where I draw the line.
Yeah, exactly. Growing up, was your family creative at all?
My dad was super into music. I believe he was the choir director, and my mom sang in the choir. So they were more musical. I do know, and I found this out way later on when I was older, but apparently one of my grandparents' parents, I can't remember whose father it was, but apparently he was an actor, and he would like make his own movies. But then, the Korean War happened, and a lot of those movies are on the other side, so we have no access to them. But I was so surprised. I felt like such a black sheep in my family for so long. So to find out that it's like, oh yeah, your great grandpa or whatever, he used to just be like, yeah, let's make a movie and I'll be in it. And I was like, that would have been really important to me as a child, feeling like no one understands me and I'm such a black sheep in this family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish I had access to those movies. I would love to know what he wrote himself as and made these movies.
Yeah. And was it like home movie type things, or was it a little bit more professional? Like
I
indie
feel like
film?
it must have been professional. Like
Yeah.
he was like definitely acting in them is what my relatives told me. It wasn't like he was doing a documentary or just creating like a vlog or anything. He was like a story and there was like a narrative.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you said you felt like a black sheep in the family. Did you always kind of want to perform and do, performance type things as a kid?
Oh, yeah. 100%. I can remember like, my grandma would always have the cousins over. We're like grandma daycare essentially, where all the adults would drop us off and they'd go to work, especially during like the summer or spring break. And then we would play. And my favorite thing to play was let's put on a talent show. And all my other cousins are like, or we could play house. I was like, or we can do an elaborate dance sequence and present it for our grandma and grandpa. And they're like, oh, fine, Sarah. And so I feel like I remember growing up performing and wanting to perform, but I feel like that love and drive kept going. Whereas, like, a lot of my other cousins are like, well, I'm going to be a city planner now or a lawyer. Whereas I'm like, no, we got to keep this going, guys. Come on.
Keep the band together.
Keep it. Come on. Let's keep the band together. One more performance in front of grandma and grandpa. Yeah.
You studied theater at UC Irvine. But were you doing like theater all throughout high school and stuff as well?
Actually, no. I have an interesting history with theater in high school. I always wanted to do theater, but every time I auditioned, I didn't get anything. And so I always ended up doing backstage stuff. And then when I did junior college for a couple years before I went to UC Irvine. I went to College of the Canyons. And that's where I met my mentor, Alan Troutman. I wanted to be a filmmaker. And one of the requirements was you had to take humanities classes. And I was like, oh, I'm going to easy A. I'm going to take a theater class. So I took a theater class, and I'll never forget it. The teacher like pulled me aside and was like, you're pretty good. Like, are you sure you just don't want to do theater? Like, you want to direct or be a writer for screen? And I was like, yeah, I'm not. This is just for my humanities requirement. I'm not interested in that. And then I had to take another class, and of course, I took the easy way, which one of the classes they offered was improv. So I took the improv class, and then that's how I met Alan Troutman. And I really fell in love with acting and performing in college because I never got the chance to in high school. To be fair, my high school was very competitive when it came to the theater department, and there were just so many talented kids. I was never in Pippin or Chorus Line. Also, I felt like I just didn't fit into whatever mold they were looking for. And what's crazy about puppetry is I didn't even think this was an option. You know, I didn't grow up watching Sesame Street being like, oh, that's a job I could have.
Right.
I just enjoyed it for the art that it was. So it's crazy to think that, like, you know, now that this is part of my life.
Yeah. So what was it that you liked about improv when you started doing improv and working with Alan Troutman?
It was interesting because the first class I ever took with Alan Troutman, I was one of two women. And I think it already made me stand out a little bit. So I think for me, I got very lucky in that class because I got featured a lot in so many scenes because I was one of two women. So it's always like, I'm the sassy girlfriend, or I'm like, you know, the mean grandma. And it's like, I got to be so many things that I feel I couldn't have been if I was in a more diverse class of men and women. And I think I fell in love with it because I realized I could be whatever I want to be. It didn't matter what my age was, what I looked like, you know, what my ethnicity was. I could be whoever I wanted in improv, and it made sense in the scene. And I feel like that's also one of the reasons I fell in love with puppetry, was because, like, I could be 7 years old. I could be 100 years old. I could be a boy. I could be a girl. I could be, you know, an owl. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. How did you get connected with the Jim Henson Company to start working there and training there?
So Alan Troutman, who was my improv teacher in college, I guess Henson reached out to him and asked, hey, do you know any like tall women who are funny that we could possibly teach how to puppeteer? And I, along with I think a handful of other women, including Nicolette Santino, were on that list. And I remember when he reached out, he was literally like, hey, do you want to take a puppet improv class? And at the time, I was working at like a doctor's office, and I was just trying to make money to take improv classes. So for me, I was like, a free improv class? Sure, let's do it. Who cares about the puppet part? It's free improv. And so I was so excited, and I immediately said yes to Alan. And he gave me the address. And of course, I Googled it because I was like, whose basement is this? Where are we going? And it was the Henson Company lot. And my eyes got so big. I was like, oh, this is like a legitimate class where they're going to teach me how to puppeteer Henson style. This is wild. So, like, that's how I first got introduced into Henson. And then, you know, we're taking these, I guess at the time they're called diversity workshops for years, I want to say. And then there was one day where someone up top was finally like, we're going to have a recital for all you guys to do your little puppet up thing. And we're going to show Henson. And in my head, I was like, great, that sounds fun. We're getting ready for the show. And they tell us who's in the front row of this recital. And it's Brian Henson, Cheryl Henson, Lisa Henson, Johnny Tartaglia, Kevin Clash, all these people that are huge in the puppeteering community. And then I think Patrick Bristow was like, remember, it's not an audition. And then just leaves the room. And I just remember freaking out thinking like, I was just going to show the people at Henson what I've been working so hard on for the past couple of years. I didn't think it was going to be like this. But what was great was after I did that showcase, essentially, Henson reached out and said, hey, do you want to audition for Splash and Bubbles? And I was like, sure. And that was my first project with Henson.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk about that, but I want to go back a little bit just to, or go back quite a bit to the beginning of your puppetry training. And for you, what was the most difficult thing to kind of nail down to learn how to do the Henson style of puppetry?
To be quite honest, it was probably the flip. Because for those of you who don't know puppetry, when we're looking at monitors, we're seeing what the camera sees. So it is basically opposite. It's not a mirror of what we see when we're doing the puppetry. So for me, the first couple times I puppeteer, my puppet looked so drunk because I just could not figure out how to get him to stand up straight. But I think for me, even now, still sometimes when people go, look right, I'm like, which right are they talking about? My right or the camera right? So I think that was the hardest thing for me to learn. And what was crazy was when I first started puppeteering, you know, you're also doing improv scenes because that's why you got invited was because you're good at improv. My improv skills went out the window. I felt like I was in basic 101 improv class because you put a doll on my hand. All that part of my brain did not want to work for some reason. And now it does. Now it's a happy marriage. But that was the hardest part, I think, was to also realize you're like, I have to be funny and improvise and also be good at puppeteering. This is so hard.
Yeah. Juggle all these things now.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you are brilliant at it, and I love you're a brilliant improviser and a brilliant puppeteer, and I love performing with you. But let's talk about Splash and Bubbles and what you worked on Splash and Bubbles. What was your role there?
So I was one of the puppeteers. It was an interesting show because there's 4 main characters, and it was HDPS. So that's the Henson digital puppetry system. So very similar to like shows like Word Party and Sid the Science Kid, we had motion capture, but the motion capture was basically like a PVC pipe that looked like a fish with mocap balls on it. And there was a puppeteer puppeteering that mocap puppet, and I was one of those puppeteers. So I was the puppeteer for Ripple, which was a seahorse, and my counterpart was Amy Garcia. She was the voice and did the face. And then we also did voices for like auxiliary characters. So I'm Denny the cleaner fish. I was a whale. And so I feel like I was so grateful for that show because it was such a big learning curve to go from like arm and rod puppetry, then to have you thrown and be like, here's a doll that looks like a puppet, but you have to look at these screens and puppeteer it in the digital space. So that was wild. And then on top of that, to be like, oh, we're going to keep the cast small. So this auxiliary character, you're going to voice them. PBS wants you to do 3 kinds of voices right now and send it over to them, and they're going to pick. So to go from like an office job where I'm literally taking people's copays and checking insurance policies to then being like, okay, I need to think of 3 character voices that sound like a kid, and they have to be all kind of different, and I have to go in the corner of the soundstage and record it for PBS, and then they're going to tell me which one I like. And then I have to remember which one they like. And then when I go into the booth, I have to do that entire character like that. So it was very scary, but I learned a lot. And I'm so thankful for all the people that were super patient with me and the people that were like, what do you mean you don't know? I was like, I'm so green. This is my first show, please. So
Did you, when you voiced the characters, did you also do the digital studio puppeteering for like their mouth and stuff?
no, luckily there were some characters that were fully animated.
Okay.
And luckily, like the core 4 people that did HDPS faces, like they'd done it before. Or the auxiliary characters that did require an HDPS puppeteer, it was like people like Alan or Alice Deneen who, you know, have done it before. But I got very lucky where most of mine were just like they were fully animated. So I just had to go into the booth and speak and do the little voices and get directed. It was perfect.
I don't know if it was necessarily then, but you know a little bit about the digital puppetry studio. Like you've worked on it before, though, right? Have you trained on it officially or just played around with it?
I played around with it, which is funny for those of you who listen and watch Puppet Up. They always make me do HTPS, and I let the record show that I am not formally trained in HTPS. When I did HTPS, I was the motion capture part. So for me, when Patrick was like, "You're gonna do HTPS," I knew some of the concepts of it. And I remember like I would practice a little bit on Splash and Bubbles when someone wasn't in the scene, but I never was like, I'm an HDPS puppeteer. Absolutely not. And so for me, I think Patrick Bristow likes to put me on that because he likes to see me sweat.
Yeah. It's also so difficult because you can set it up and like, oh, the joystick does this and, this, but you can go in and pre-program all the 80 switches that are on this thing and 12 foot pedals, so it's really, I remember Leslie Carrara Rudolph, I think I probably said this on the podcast before, but Leslie Carrara Rudolph always said to get trained on the Henson Digital Puppetry Studio, you spend your first 2 weeks crying. Yeah. And then after that, you're fine. So like you, because I did the same thing. I remember when Puppet Up went to Vegas and they were like, Grant, you're going to do HDPS. And I was like, I don't know. I've never trained on this, and Alan gave me like a very quick, and Alan helped develop it. So he's a good guy to train you. But yeah, it's not, and even more recently, I've done a little bit of training on it, like go in and Drew Massey has helped me work on it. But every day is like starting over again.
Oh, yeah.
Like every time you go back in, it's like, I was just here last week, but I have forgotten absolutely everything.
Right. And like, it's so crazy how people's programs are so different from one person to another.
Right.
Because I'm so like such a people pleaser that sometimes I'll just like, oh, I'll just do it on Alan's program and I'll figure out how it works.
Yeah.
And even sometimes where they're like, we built one for you. This is what you used last time. I was like, it is? This is awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember I working with Drew. I was like, oh, can we change the eyes to do this instead of this? And he was like, why would you want to do that? And I go, because in my brain, that's more natural. That's right. But that's the great thing about the system is you can do that. You
it's also just, everyone, puppeteers are intuitive in different ways. Like, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but like when I worked on Five Nights 2, this time around, our controllers were a lot more programmable because there was a lot more stuff that you could do. There's a lot more buttons and things like that. So it was interesting because, like, my controller was very different than Russ's controller and Amanda's controller and Alice's controller. And it was funny because there were some times where they were like, oh, I put the eyes on this because it's easier to access. I was like, oh, my God, why didn't I think of that? And then I'll have to call someone over. It's like, can you reprogram my thing to make it do what Alice does? Okay, thanks.
Well, what's something that you learned working on the set of Splash and Bubbles that you still use today? When you, is there any sort of lesson or the way sets work? It doesn't even have to be puppetry related.
There was something so magical about Splash and Bubbles, and like I said, I'm just really grateful that that was my first show. And even talking to Leslie Carrara Rudolph, she was like, I need you to know that not all TV shows and movies are going to be like this. So be prepared. And I think I was truly spoiled. It was like everyone worked really well together. Like at lunch, you would see PAs sitting with puppeteers, sitting with grips, and we're all just eating lunch together. And I don't know if it's because we're all in this weird digital space that we all kind of like became friends outside the digital space because there's no sets. There's no like physical cameras. We had camera guys with like what looked like remote control robots that were moving the camera in a digital space. So I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways from that is to just like, if you do have a rare instance where everyone jives on set, like just to like really like hold space for that. Sorry to sound like Ariana Grande. I don't just be grateful for it. And like, cause sometimes I like realize, and I'm sure you're like this, where you're like, oh man, I was really excited to get this job. But at the end of the day, it's still a job.
Yeah.
They didn't wash these green suits, or our trailers are from the 1970s. This is all just from one production. And so for me, the takeaway was to just be like, just to show up and be present and just to take every day as it is. And that some days are going to be really great and some days aren't. And at the end of it, what's wonderful is that a bunch of people are all here together making this one thing, which is what I think the industry is about.
Excellent. You also spent some time working on Kidding with Jim Carrey
I did.
as a utility puppeteer. Can you talk a little bit about what your role was on that production?
I wish I got to meet Jim Carrey. I didn't. We were in a different scene. There was a part of Kidding where there was a Japanese version of the Jim Carrey show because Jim Carrey played a character named Mr. Pickles. And so we did a show called Pickle-san, I think. So it was interesting because when I auditioned, they're like, "We love her. We're gonna put a hold on her." And in my head, all my friends were working on the show. It's like, why haven't they brought me in yet? What is going on? They were saving me for the Asian episode, me and Liz Hera. Um, so it was interesting because you don't see us it's a very quick puppeteer thing, but they needed us because they yell cut and we all come out from where we've been puppeteering, and it's set in Japan, obviously. So that was interesting. That was the first time I'd been on a thing where I was hired as a puppeteer, but they wanted to put hair and makeup on me. And that experience was interesting because, we're never in hair and makeup. And so I remember I was sitting there and this woman, she was this older lady. She kind of smelled like cigarettes. And she was just really close to my face. And she's like, "You're too shiny." And she's like taking off all the highlight and the stuff that I usually wear on a regular basis. And she's like, "How do you wear your hair when you puppeteer?" And I was like this. And she's like, "Mama, put it in a ponytail." And she puts my hair back in the slickest of ponytails. And if you know me in person, like my hair's always down. I like having a wild, wispy hairdo. So the fact that she slicked it back, I was mortified and I just felt like so not like myself. And I remember being in the bathroom and just like carefully taking little wisps out just so I looked a little bit more like myself. So it was interesting because I'm not in it for very long, but I got to get the full, like, this is what happens when you're a real actor kind of situation. I think it definitely solidified where I'm like, I think I like being a puppeteer. I don't think I like being in front of the camera.
Well, I will say we'll jump ahead a little bit. You did do like more of a face character. You did more of a role in Earth to Ned because you and I did a scene together.
I did.
As Ernest Zupensalad, and you were my coworker.
Right. I also think it's funny because it's like production brought up Earth to Ned to be like, "Oh, it's gonna be so funny because it's an Easter egg because you're a puppeteer." And I'm like thinking in my head, no one's gonna get that. No one's gonna be like, "Oh, she's a puppeteer." Even the other office workers were just like, "Did you audition?
Yeah,
How
they were
did
extras,
you get?" They were extras, and they're like, "How did you get this role?" And I'm like, "I'm a puppeteer." And they asked me to do it.
Yeah.
So, and I need you to know, I can't anymore, but have never seen that episode.
Oh, really?
I don't like seeing myself on camera. I don't mind my puppeteering on camera, but for some reason, I just would rather not.
I may have it, so I may get to because I played that character during that episode, so I got it for my reel. So I may have that. Anyway, that's a topic for a different time.
I wish we had more of a storyline because I think in my head, my character was in love with your Claude.
My Claude. But I had a similar experience on, not sort of, but Brian one day on Earth to Ned was like, "Oh, you're going to play a person as yourself on Earth to Ned." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And they like fitted me for this suit. And it was all like, I didn't know this going in on the day. And then they fit me in this whole suit. But then it was like some dream sequence that I think Michael Ostrom's character Cornelius had, where he's the host and he's interviewing a Claude with a human body. So they just put a Claude's head on my human body. Anyway, it was that was a fun show.
Yeah, they're really utilizing us in every aspect on that show.
Get in a suit. You're puppeteering, and now you're gonna go do this. We also worked together on a show called Let's Be Real. Mm-hmm. And that was the political puppet show. And what I remember about that were the puppets were very different from other puppets that I had used before in that they were hand and rod puppets, but they were just built a little different. They were a little heavier almost. Yeah.
I remember, I can't remember who on production said this, but someone said they wanted them to be as to human scale as possible, which is hard when you have a human puppeteering something that's human scale. So it was like they were all very tall, they're all very heavy. They looked great. They looked like those characters. I also thought it was interesting because this is very much something that you and I have dealt with. When you deal with productions that know puppetry, it's wonderful because you go on set, all the sets are raised, you got wheelies on standby, like it's wonderful. And then sometimes, you work on productions where they like the idea of a puppet and love the concept, but they don't realize the logistics that go into it. So that show was interesting because there were so many times where I'm like, why? Why is there carpet on the ground?
Right.
And then, the art deck guy would be like, well, because you're in a hotel room. And you're like, but you're not going to see the carpet. You're going to see the puppets. And then all of a sudden it becomes how are we going to wheel someone on this carpet? So now all these people are flying in plastic, like little sheet things. So then Grant can roll into the scene.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting to be part of a production where you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot more things that go into just puppetry than just putting a puppet in front of a camera,
Yeah, I'm realizing now, asking you this, that I've kind of jumped out of order a little bit because that was like when we started coming out of COVID. I think that show, that Let's
Yeah.
Be Real show, because I remember we had to get tested every day and do that. But you worked on a show during COVID,
I did.
Barbarian and the Troll. So can you talk about getting the job on Barbarian and the Troll and working on that show?
So it was right before COVID happened. What was wild was I got invited. I remember I auditioned because a bunch of other of my lovely female puppeteers texted me and were like, "You're gonna get this, right?" And I was confused because I think in the description it said a teenage girl that's been turned into an owl is kind of sassy with like a stand-up edge, like think Natasha Leggero. And so I think a lot of people were like, oh, clearly this was written for you, which was very lovely that they thought that. But we filmed it right before. And what was crazy was right as COVID was starting. So I remember filming the sizzle, the pilot, and we were like not shaking hands. We were doing like that weird, like we would kick each other's boots. We would say hello by kicking boots with each other. And then we filmed it. And I remember I watched and I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is like something I would want to watch as a kid. And then lockdown happened. So we're like, well, I don't know what's going to come out of that. And then miraculously, they were like, we're going to make the show, but they want to do it in Canada. And at the time, I was deep in lockdown. So I was like, I have nothing else going on. So yes, please. And so it was honestly such a wonderful experience because I think all of us puppeteers also just wanted to leave LA because we were just stuck there. The crazy part was we had to quarantine per the government 2 weeks. My favorite part was at like 6 p.m. every day, we would all come out on our balconies and wave at each other because all of our hotel rooms were on the same side. And Drew Massey, who had gotten there like a week or so earlier, had already been out of quarantine. So sometimes he would drive down the alley where our windows faced and he would wave from his car and all of us would wave from the balcony. And then we got into production. And then production was interesting too. I had never done a puppet show where you're like filming on location and you're cold and in a park. But all those shots were so beautiful, I think, because if you watch the show, like it looks like they're in nature.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we became like really close. I feel like we were weirdly trauma bonded almost because we had to like spend Thanksgiving together. And like, I know that like a lot of people, like Alan was missing his family and like Peggy was missing her family. And it was hard. So I think we all kind of clung to each other because we were each other's pod essentially. So when we weren't filming, we're on the weekend just hanging out.
To me, Barbarian and the Troll kind of sounds like this production. Because, you work on productions like Let's Be Real, where it's like you get there, you're not 100% sure what you're going to do that day. They're just going to say, hey, you, grab these 3 puppets. You're going to stand over here. You're going to do that. But Barbarian and the Troll, I almost kind of look at it as like, oh, I wish I was part of it because it sounds like it was this great, small, connected group of people. But then you were all just doing different, like a million different characters, because you had to build this world with a small group of puppeteers. And I know Nikki talked about a shot with I think the gnomes.
Yeah, the
where
market shot.
you had to keep running around and doing
I
different
wish
ones.
someone took behind the scenes
Yeah.
footage because it was like a relay race. Because if you watch the scene, me and Nikki are chickens in the beginning in a cart, and then the minute the camera, like we like threw the chickens on the ground, ran under the camera and picked up our next puppet, and then all of a sudden I'm like someone helping someone out at like a stand, and then the camera pans and I drop that puppet and we run out, and it was wild, but it was so fun because it was one of those things just like, we have to do this. There aren't enough of us. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. It's not like we can just be like, hey, Grant, can you come to Canada and be in this large group scene? So we had to be really creative. And I feel like some of the shots, I know that it's like a bunch of us really struggling. There's one episode where they're like in a courtroom and there's a jury, and I need you to know that that's all of us double fisting puppets. And you know this as a puppeteer, our left hand is not great at being, or like your non-dominant hand's not great at being a puppet. So it was funny because you'll see like everyone's, like every other puppet's really great looking, and then the one next to them's kind of like wonky and doesn't know where to look. And that's because that's usually someone's left hand. And luckily those shots are pretty quick, but we had to get creative, or we'd have to get our director Mike and be like, here, just stand in the background, hold this puppet.
Well, it sounds like it was just, everybody who's told stories on here about it, it was a great experience. Like, it was a really great show to work on.
I wish we had a season 2.
Yeah.
At Nickelodeon.
You also got to do a bit of puppetry on a really fun project that I don't think most people think of when they think of puppetry, but that is the YouTube video series Postmodern Jukebox, where they take songs, but then modern songs, but then do them in sort of a vintage style, or just all different kind of styles. Can you talk a little bit about the puppetry you did for them?
Yeah, so we did a kids' little like YouTube series called Postmodern Jukebox, and basically Postmodern Jukebox's creator, Scott Bradley, he's the guy on the piano, and the tambourine guy, Tim Kubart. So Tim used to be on a show called Sunnyside, and there were like puppets, I believe. And so he became friends with kind of like the NYC puppeteers and things like that. And he was friends with John Tartaglia. And John, I think, is the one that recommended me because they wanted to do this little kids program. And so I met with Scott and Tim, and we like really hit it off, and got to make a couple shows. And it was great because every episode someone from Postmodern Jukebox would come in and teach like what the blues is or what rhythm is and things like that. And we literally just filmed it in Scott Bradley's house in Encino. He had like a little studio set up. And it was super fun. I loved all the like responses, especially because, it was exposing a lot of music to kids, or people that liked Postmodern Jukebox could show this to their kids. My favorite part of that project, though, was we did a live stream. And I don't know how you live stream, Grant, because I was so exhausted at the end of it. They did this crazy Christmas live stream where you can go from room to room in Scott Bradley's house. And so in his living room, he like had a full band, and they're going to town playing Christmas songs. And then there was like another little acoustic room and someone singing acoustic songs. And then you get to my room, it's like clarinet, and we're making Christmas crafts. And for some reason, that was the busiest room of the live stream. And we're making these little crafts and stuff. But I'd get tired because I have my hand up in the air. So I'd be like, Mom, better get more crayons. And I would just go down my table and lay there or sit there for a little bit while the blood rushed back to my arm, and then be like, found the crayons. And would have to do it again. We did it for like, I want to say, not an hour, but it felt like an hour of live streaming. And then like singers would pop in too. And then there were times I was just like, get out of my room, I need a break.
Well, my secret is I have an Apple box on a TV tray that I rest my arm on. But when
you heard it here, folks. You heard it here first.
When you're streaming for an hour or longer, to like get a following on Twitch, they say you have to stream for like 4 hours.
That's wild.
And it's like you can't stream for 4 hours with your arm in the air. Like I don't, we're not all Heath McIver, aka Randy Feltface, who can hold our arm up for hours upon end. But
and barefoot and squatting.
yes. So anyway, but no, that is because that is such a fun series, and I guess I must have known you then, but like I think I tuned into that, but I didn't know it was you until later that was because I tuned into that live stream when that was happening. But that's a lot of fun. I want to ask you about Puppet Up Uncensored, but I do want to ask, you have a career also in stand-up comedy as well, right?
I had a very brief career in stand-up comedy. It's so crazy because I didn't realize that Muppet Wiki was a thing, and a friend of mine found my Muppet Wiki page, and she read it to me, and she's like, she was a stand-up comedian. I was like, you just stand up for a few years, and then all of a sudden, that's your whole personality. No, I did stand-up for, I want to say, like a handful of years. I really enjoyed it. I feel like stand-up is a great tool to get immediate feedback on your jokes. And so for me, I loved writing and I loved writing jokes. So for me, stand-up was a great way to test out those jokes. Mm-hmm. Also, it's such a, I don't want to say a better high or anything like that, but it's such an interesting experience to be a singular person that makes a whole room laugh versus improv where you're on a team and you're kind of like helping each other out. So it was so much fun to do stand-up. I don't think I was built for stand-up. Like being at those clubs really late, going to open mic nights. When you're first starting out in stand-up, you do a lot of what they call bringer shows. So you get the amount of time based on how many people you bring.
It's the worst.
It's like a minute a person.
Yeah.
Then for me, I really got bogged down because at a certain point it stopped becoming about writing and the jokes and more about who's going to come to my show. I need at least 10 people to come to the show or else I can't do my 10 minutes or whatever it may be. And also, like, I don't want to sound like this person, but sometimes, when you're doing stand-up, you got to sit through a lot of bad stand-up to do your good stand-up.
Yeah.
And for me, at a certain point, I was like, I don't want to keep spending my Friday nights like this. And also, it's expensive to do stand-up. And I mean that it's expensive for your friends. Like, I would just feel so bad because I would be performing at these really cool venues like the Comedy Store. But you have to tell your friend, hey, so it's a 2-item minimum.
Yeah.
You have to find parking in West Hollywood and pay for parking. And then you have to drive in the middle of traffic to come see me. And so for me, I just kind of stopped because I was like, I don't want to keep torturing my friends like this. And plus, I got to do more Puppet Up, and I feel like all that energy got redirected towards Puppet Up.
Do you think that is there anything that you learned by doing stand-up that helped your puppetry? Maybe there's not, but I'm just thinking to ask that question.
I will say I feel like I'm a lot more comfortable doing audience work, whether I'm in a puppet or not. Yeah, I feel like doing stand-up, your only auditory feedback is laughter. So I feel like it's given me a gauge of like, oh, they like that joke, so I'm going to keep pushing that joke. And I think that's something that translates to Puppet Up too, where it's like, I mean, you felt it where you're like, oh, they're really grabbing onto this one little thing in the scene, so I'm just going to keep bringing it up.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's what I learned, is to kind of like really feel out the audience as to what they're vibing with, what they think is funny. Because sometimes too, like you'll think a joke is really funny when you're doing it once at the Comedy Store, and you'll go to another venue and people hate that joke.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Puppet Up, what do you enjoy most about performing in Puppet Up?
What do I enjoy most?
Yes.
I enjoy, honestly, just goofing around with you guys. I know it's so silly, but it's like, I feel like I'm at a point doing Puppet Up, because Puppet Up is like the deep end, I think, for Henson, where they're like, we taught you how to puppeteer, and you're kind of funny, so here you go. See if you can do it in front of a live audience. So when you first do Puppet Up, at least for me, I was so nervous that I couldn't really enjoy myself. Because in my head, and like, improvs became secondary. Because for me, I'd be like, okay, I got 2 more improvs, and then I gotta do this this piece, and I got to remember to make sure to move my arm a certain way so the fire extinguisher doesn't zap me, or whatever it may be. And and so I would get so caught up, and I still do sometimes, especially when, they're like, Sarah, you're going to do this new thing for the show. And you're like, what? So that's also great too, because I feel like I don't get too comfortable doing Puppet Up. But I think the most fun, honestly, is just to have fun with you guys, because I can finally be at a place where I'm like, I know the vintage recreations. I'll do it. I know the opening and closing number. I don't have to be running choreography while Grant is doing another scene. But I look like I'm actively listening by looking at the monitor below me. Now I can just, have loose, have fun. Also, like, throw you guys curveballs without feeling like, oh my God, Grant's going to hate me because I told him to recite a poem that rhymes in this scene. So the comfort, I think. And I love the reaction we get when we do the shows, especially if no one's seen it before, because it's such a great mix of improv, but also just stuff that's so classic and classically funny and timeless. And my favorite thing to hear after a show a lot of times is when people are like, hey, I was like having a rough week, or like I just wasn't having a good day, and then I came to the show and I've never laughed so hard where like tears are like running down my eyes. And like that's what makes me feel good, to have a show where people can just kind of forget for a second and just have a good time and watch puppets doing silly things.
Absolutely. How did you enjoy when Puppet Up, because you did a lot of the shows there, where Puppet Up was at Knott's Berry Farm?
Yes.
Did you enjoy that?
I mean, you know this. I'm a Halloween girl. I love spooky things. So to do a show where they're like, hey, you get to do Puppet Up, and then afterwards you get to go into haunted houses for free, that was my dream gig. Are you kidding me? I think there was one year where like we just tried to do a maze every night. And one of my favorite memories is I think we did a run of shows one year where like I think some of the scare actors must have come to see it. For those of you who don't know, a scare actor is those actors inside of a maze or a haunted house. But they must have seen it, because we're walking through some clown maze, I remember, and this big clown is like following us, and I was like, what is going on? And he just gets right in my ear and he goes, Puppet Up, and he runs away. And so I feel like he must have seen the show. Or like I remember we were like waiting in line for a roller coaster after a show, and you just hear people at the bottom of the stairs going, hey, puppets, Puppet Up. So it was the best gig. You felt like a rock star afterwards. And yeah, I mean, granted, it's not for everyone. Not everyone's built to do 3 shows in the middle of the night. But I mean, I had a lot of fun. Those were one of my favorite shows. Also, there was a lot less pressure.
Right.
Because you're doing 3 shows a day, 30 to 45 minutes each. So if you like messed up, or you're like, oh, that wasn't a great scene, you're like, yeah, who cares? There's 2 more people, two more shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those were. I mean, I like you. I mean, because we also know you and I are both theme park fans as well. So to get to do that in a theme park was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That, and like another theme park gig that I love, which might be on your list, is I loved doing the Muppets at Disneyland.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that.
That was probably one of my dream gigs.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Disney.
Yes.
And I got to be Pepe, which was wild. By the way, the first Muppet thing I got to do was Haunted Mansion. And I'm not like Nikki. Nikki got a line as a tomato. I'm just Camilla Chicken in the background most of the time. And that shoot was so difficult for me, because when I would look at the monitor, I know I'm in the scene, but I would just keep watching Miss Piggy and Kermit in the foreground and forget that I'm an extra in the background with Alan. And I would just be frozen, because I would just be watching Miss Piggy and Kermit have their scene. And then you'd hear like Kirk in the background be like, background, can we have some more movement, please? And you're like, oh my God, I'm in the scene. So the only Muppet puppet I got to actually physically touch is Camila. So to have Pepe, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, Pepe is ergonomically designed. He has like a wooden ball that rests on your palm with like a nice little trigger. I mean, I feel like Bill has like the Ferrari of puppets when it comes to Pepe. And that was such a dream gig, because all I had to do was lip sync. I was in a moving omnibus with Nicolette. There was another puppeteer, Brandon, and Alex. And we're literally driving down Main Street. You're smelling churros and waffle cone. And then after your first performance, they're like, you get a 2-hour break because they're going to do the Christmas parade next. And then all of us would go and go get Dole Whips. And we would just wait and we would just eat all the food and then we'd come back and do 2 more performances. It was the best gig. And it was the best gig because I love theme parks and I love watching theme park vlogs. I'm sorry if I'm getting really excited.
No, please do.
But I would watch these theme park vlogs because they would record our performances, and to see like 40-plus-year-old men get teary-eyed because they saw the Muppets live, like, come on, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a fun gig too. And I think a lot of times people, well, it might be true in some cases, but go like, oh, you're performing in a theme park.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they kind of look down at it. But, and I understand, like, Puppet Up is not a theme park show. Puppet Up, it was in a theme park, but it's not a theme park show. And like this Muppets thing, yeah, maybe it was a theme park show, but you're also puppeteering the Muppets, you know, and these are actual Muppets. So, I don't know. I think it's a great experience. And I think even if you are doing 3 shows a night, or how many, I think I asked Nikki this, but how many times a night
we did 3, I think.
3, yeah. All of that is a chance to perform, but also work on your puppetry and use it for you. Like, because I've held that Pepe puppet too. It's like a different style of puppet than what we normally use and necessarily Puppet Up. And
also, I feel like I got to be Pepe because for those of you who don't know, Stacy on Barbarian and the Troll, who I played, she's an owl. She was also a trigger puppet because she was basically a chamois. Like a car wash chamois shaped like an owl, and she just had like a little trigger that moved her beak and her wings. So I feel like that's why Drew was like, no, you know, trigger puppets, you can be Pepe.
Yeah.
And I was super nervous too because, you know, these are like the OG Muppet guys. And I remember after like a week of performances, Drew was like, Bill has a note for you, Bill Barretta, who plays Pepe. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, he's going to hate my performance. And he was just like, oh, don't lean back too much. You lose him when you shimmy too far back. And I was like, less shimmying. Got it. So I felt really good that that was like the one note. Everything else, like my lip sync and bringing the character and how he acted was fine.
Awesome. So let's talk about Muppets, because you mentioned you got to work on, you worked on this project at Disneyland. You also worked on Haunted Mansion, but you also returned for the Muppets Mayhem too. What's it like working with these legendary puppeteers, and did you learn anything from working with them besides don't shimmy back too far from Bill Barretta?
That was an insane experience. We filmed Muppets Mayhem during the summer, and it was everywhere. Like, we filmed on location. We filmed like all those scenes when they're out in the desert eating expired marshmallows. That was in a sound stage in Santa Clarita where they have that giant Mandalorian wall. And apparently, like, the people that worked at that studio was like, oh, what filmed right before? And it was like the second Black Panther movie. And you're like, oh, great. Now we're making Muppets Mayhem. So that was incredible. It was very intimidating for me personally, and I can say that now because it's been a few years. You know, these are the Muppet guys, and for us, we're mostly just there to support. So I'm like Animal's right hand, or like I'm Zoot's feet. So for me, it was mostly like I just wanted to keep my head down and not ruffle any feathers. But it was great because I feel like I do have friends that I'm closer with, like Leslie Carrara Rudolph was there, and she played that big agent lady. And then, you know, Donna was there. And I'm going to tell this story, and I hope Dave Goles doesn't mind. But I was very intimidated by Dave Goles. Dave Goles plays Gonzo, along with a bunch of other very iconic characters. And every time I was on set, just wanted to be his friend. I was like, I just want to be your friend, Dave Goles. And Dave, the minute he met me, was like, what have you worked on? And I, for some reason, could not think of a singular thing I worked on except Puppet Up, which, you know, most classic Muppeteer guys do not care about Puppet Up. So I was like, I worked on Puppet. I do Puppet Up, and he like just walked away from me. He was like, I love you, Dave. And I remember we were under this stage, and I was like, Dave, you want a water? I was like the worst. I was such a fangirl, but was trying to like just be in his good graces. And finally, we're on location at the El Rey Theater, and we're doing this huge scene where the entire band is playing, and we have to do it twice because they have the camera on a robot arm. And since there's so many puppeteers on stage, they were just gonna composite it and post and erase all of us out. We're all in green suits. Every puppet has 3 puppeteers at least. I got the email the night before saying the groups of puppeteers that are going to be on each character. And in my brain, because I've had so many negative experiences with Dave so far, I was like, please, anyone but Dave Goles. Anyone. And of course, I end up being Zoot's Feet for Dave Goles and along with Donna. And I'm just trying to keep my head down because I'm like, clearly this man does not want my puppy dog energy around any more than he has to. And I remember we're like waiting around for a shot. We're all in these green suits. Dave's sitting on an apple box. And I don't know if you knew this, but on set, if I get nervous, to get nervous energy out, I'm a massager. I will just grab a pair of shoulders and I'll just start going to town because I don't know what's going on. And what's funny is almost every puppeteer I've worked with, they know this. So sometimes they'll sit close to me when they can feel that it's starting to, that nervous energy needs somewhere to go. And so I was massaging Donna, like very vigorously on set. And I just see Dave peek over and he's like, hey, you giving those out? And I was like, me? Do you want to massage? And I like shove Donna out of the way and I just run over and start massaging Dave. And Dave's just sitting there getting a massage. And I just see, Leslie Corrado Rudolph and Peter Linz, and they're all looking over, like giving me the weirdest look as why are you massaging Dave Goles? And then at the end of the day, Dave is like, hey, you did a really great job today. And I just was on cloud 9. And Leslie came up to me afterwards. She's like, that was funny that you were massaging Dave. I was like, why? He wanted a massage. She's like, oh, he doesn't like being touched. And so I felt like I broke through to him. And now we're best friends. Just kidding. Dave Goles doesn't know who I am.
I'm sure he'd remember you. Well, let's talk about Five Nights at Freddy's because it's a big monster film that you worked on.
I don't think anyone's heard about that.
Oh, no, really? I heard nothing. I mean, it's funny because knowing people who've worked on that, just looking through Instagram, and I don't necessarily follow Five Nights at Freddy stuff, but it comes through my feed. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a big thing and people love it so much that it does come through my feed. So let's talk about working on the first, and we can talk about the second because the teaser at the time of this recording has just come out. But you traveled to New Orleans to work on that, right?
I did for the first movie and the second movie, and I really love that town. I didn't at first, but I really fell in love with it for the second movie. Yeah.
So what was your role on Five Nights at Freddy's, the first one?
So on the first movie, I mostly puppeteered Bonnie, which is a guitar-playing rabbit. All the animatronics essentially had suit performers, and they were stunt guys in these suits. And they wore these helmets that the puppeteers controlled. And I had the control for Bonnie's head. We also had a character that Russ mostly puppeteered named Foxy. And whenever he would have to like walk around or be full body, I was like one of his legs. I believe so, yeah. But so for the first movie, I was just mostly Bonnie.
And those, I mean, you mentioned before you have just a little control box to control the eyes. What does the control box control? Like, what kind of things can you do with the?
So I could make the ears move. We had one of the joysticks do the eyes so the eyes could like look around. We had little buttons that would make them blink. We had like knobs that would do more of like a slow blink, or if you wanted to make their eyes narrow for a scene, we can keep them narrowed. But yeah, but we didn't have any mouth movements. They don't really talk. So
Yeah.
It was mostly just eyes, ears.
Was there any sort of learning curve, or were you able to pick it up right away?
We had a rehearsal process. So we had a few weeks where just kind of figuring out what the puppets could do, what the animatronics could do. We also did a lot of rehearsals because there's, stunts. So we wanted to see what we could do without breaking the puppets. So we had a lot of time to figure it out in terms of like eye movement and ear movement. And then once we got on set, it was a little bit more challenging because once again, it was one of those things where production doesn't realize where we'd like to see what our puppets are doing. So if we could get a monitor, that'd be great. So there are times, like fortunately, where we could just go in and see what the scene entailed and then just puppeteered live. But I feel like the performances weren't as nuanced as like in the second movie.
You've worked now, and it may be more than this, but you Barbarian and the Troll, you were up in Canada for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and now twice for Freddy's, you have been somewhere for weeks and weeks and weeks. What is your advice to a puppeteer who gets a gig like that to make that easier because you are away from home? What would you say to somebody who's like, "Oh, I just got this gig, but I've never been away from home for"?
Do it.
Do it.
Do it. I mean, this is coming from also a place of like privilege where it's like I'm a single childless millennial. I can drop things on the fly and just travel anywhere and work. If you can do it, I would recommend doing it. Also just because it's such a fun way to explore a city, and there's so many places where I would have never been like, "Oh, I could see myself living in Vancouver," until I went to Vancouver and had to live there for a little bit.
Right.
I would just say, I feel like traveling for work is just an amazing perk of the job. And being immersed in like culture is so different too, because I know New Orleans is in the United States. It's like being in a different country. They have so many different holidays. There's always something happening on the weekend. They have so many different phrases, and like there's a birthday tradition apparently in New Orleans where they pin money to you. So when there was a birthday on set, you'd see a PA with like shoulders of dollar bills. And when I first saw it, I was like, "What is that?" And they're like, "Oh, that's the New Orleans thing. They pin money to you when it's your birthday." So just do it. Just immerse yourself in the culture. Eat as much food as you can. And honestly, I feel like I'm always the best version of myself when I'm on these trips because I have no distractions. I like don't have to like think about life admin. All I have to do is work and just take care of myself. And I feel like it's such a nice reset from, being at home. So do it. If you want to, just do it.
Well, I know you can't because the film is not out and won't be out for a while when this goes out. But Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I know we can't talk too much about specific details, but I'm asking this in sort of a general way. And if you can't answer, that's fine as well. But is it sort of more of the same puppetry that we saw in the first one? Or are there, like, is this bumped up a little bit because it's the second film? Are there, like, more unique things?
I think it's bigger. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more going on. I can't say much, but the teaser trailer is out. So if you want to watch it, you'll see there are new characters. There's a new character where it took 9 of us to puppeteer, essentially, or 7 or 9 of us, but a lot of us. And, as you saw in the trailer, they're out in the world. So it's a lot bigger. There's a lot more going on. And I feel like there's a lot more puppetry in the second movie, in my opinion. And I think when I saw the teaser, I was like, "Whoa, there's a lot of puppets in this trailer. That's crazy. That's great."
Yeah.
But I think initially when we saw a promo for like the first movie, you're like, "Oh yeah, they're animatronics." But this time they're out there. They're in the world. They're out there. It's cool.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to seeing it. Well, you've also been very involved in GLOP, the Glorious Ladies of Puppetry. Can you talk about your experience working on GLOP?
I love Glop. I play Bean, who is one of the like main 4 students, along with Nicola Santino and Sherry and Colleen Smith. It came out of COVID. We filmed the first season literally in front of green screens across the world, and then we got lucky because for the second season we actually got to film it in person. I love Glop. It was just also so powerful because I remember the first meeting we had a big Zoom call and we were doing like a table read of all the episodes that Colleen had written. And to see that many female puppeteers on screen was amazing. To see like this grid and to also see like puppeteers that I look up to, especially after joining the puppeteering community, to see like Louise Gold on the call or like Pam on the call, to just be like, "Oh my God, these women are so cool." And I'm like just part of it. I'm just happy to be at the table, as Carrie Coon says in the last episode of White Lotus. It was amazing. And I feel like I'm so lucky that I get to work with really talented women. And it was such an interesting experience filming in person because everything up until that point I had known, I literally just filmed my parts and then called it a day. So to actually get to like improvise and play off of the other puppeteers was wonderful. I love just messing around with Colleen being, silly little girl characters. And a lot of that got cut into the second season, which I love. It's just silly, like lunchroom talk. I think there's like a line where I talk about like how Myers-Briggs tests are super important because everyone needs a personality. So I feel like it was so much more collaborative in person. And I just am so happy that there's a space for women or people that identify as female or anyone, queer, trans people, to have this space of puppetry where they can feel like they really belong and create. I love when we do those film festivals and things like that. I was one of the judges. Whew. I watched a lot of short films, but it was great, and it was just amazing to see all the talent that's out there. And we did a live show in San Francisco, I want to say last year. We did Sketchfest, and to see like actual like little girls bring puppets to the show, oh, so cute.
Well, as someone who has performed in television and movies and live on stage with Puppet Up, do you have a format sort of that you prefer?
I feel like they're all so different, and they like kind of like fulfill different parts of my life. I love performing live because you get that instant response, but I also love being on set because being on set, to me, you feel like this palpable energy of everyone's working towards a common goal, whether you're, in the art department or you're, a camera guy. We're all just here to make this movie or TV show. And I love that energy. So I really don't have a preference. I love doing everything. And there's also a wonderful thing about puppetry is people have such a visceral reaction to it. So whether I'm doing it live or on film, when people find out that I'm a puppeteer or I worked on something that they love, it's such a like, what? So the audience reaction is great, whether it's film or live. So I love all of it.
Well, I always like to wrap up by asking, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
You mean besides giving Dave Gold a massage? No, what has been a highlight? I feel like my entire career has been a highlight. And I know that's so cheesy, but it's because I never thought I'd be doing this. I, for the longest time, wanted to be a very serious actor or like a filmmaker, something, accolades, all that stuff. And I honestly, when people ask me about puppetry, it's like I fell into it. I feel like all the stars aligned. I met Alan Troutman. He like recommended me. What's crazy is Alan Troutman and I have had such like full circle moments. Like, he played my dad on Barbarian and the Troll. And I remember we were on set where he's like, remember when I would teach you improv? And I was like, Alan, do not make me cry on this set. I swear. So the whole journey has been a highlight. Like, I would have never imagined where they're like, you're going to be a Muppet and you're going to be going down Main Street on a moving omnibus, or you're going to be in one of the biggest horror franchises ever. Like, I'm just very grateful to get any opportunity. And like I said, there have been some times where you're like, this is a job and it's okay. But the whole thing has been a highlight. And I think it's because I just never saw my career going in this direction, but I'm so glad it did because now I don't have to go into hair and makeup at 7 a.m. I can just put on a puppet and do my job and go home. And I can also just go to the grocery store and no one mobs me. Not that anyone would, but I could live a fairly normal life being a puppeteer versus what I originally wanted. And I'm very thankful for that.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I had fun.
Many thanks to Sarah O for being on the show. For links to Sarah's social media, as well as to some of the other things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 108, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Sarah O, it's available to the bonus content patrons and above over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who helped make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Jeff Toro, Lee Thompson, Paul, Ricky Chavez, and Scott Armstrong. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, send them via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2025 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.